had to face, she concocted this image of her daughter, a perfect, normal, strong girl. But Parker did not meet these expectations. Jordan took her on a hike, the most dangerous hike known in Midlands. And in this hike, Parker was complaining, begging her mother to just listen to her, to slow down, because she couldn't do it. And Jordan snapped. Parker was never heard from again. The next time Parker was seen was dead at the bottom of a cliff. Now, if there are 3 things that I would like you to pay attention to, it's 1. Jordan's actions. You will hear today from Kelly Deuce. You will hear the interactions between Jordan and her daughter Parker. Now, the defense will tell you of this loving relationship between Jordan and Parker, but the only person who observed this loving relationship is Jordan herself. Kelly will testify that the relationship that he observed was hostile. They were not friendly towards each other. Parker was obviously very frustrated with her mother, and her mother was the same with her. What did she do with that frustration? She pushed her daughter physically. The second thing I would like for you to pay attention to is the timeline. Kelly Deuce will propose a timeline of when she saw Parker and Jordan, and then the last time she saw Parker alive. Now, this is between 4 and 6 p.m. We'll call a doctor, Dr. Quincy, and he will tell you the exact same thing. Their timelines will coincide, but the defense's doctor, the timeline doesn't match. The third thing I would like for you to pay attention to is a napkin. This damning piece of evidence will show you excuses that the defendant had as to why she no longer was in possession of her daughter. She will show you plans that she had to run away and not call the cops. Excuses that she would give the cops if she would be under investigation. And money amounts that she would receive for her daughter's death. Insurance money. Now, we as the prosecution have the burden of proof. And the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very high standard. But the evidence, the testimony, these points will meet that standard. You will know beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant knowingly committed aggravated murder against her own daughter. Now, we have a dead 12-year-old girl, a girl whose life was taken from her. And the reason is in this room. Find her guilty. Permission to deconstruct.
Does opposing counsel want to use the demo?
No, Your Honor. You may construct.
Take it down. Defense, opening statement.
May it please the court?
It does.
Members of the jury, they saw what they wanted to see. On July 14th, 2018, a 12-year-old girl by the name of Parker Page sadly lost her life. We are all devastated by this tragedy. But the prosecution demands that somebody be blamed for her death. And in their search for a suspect, Detective Chesney, the MCPD, and the state of Midlands fell victim to tunnel vision. They saw what they wanted to see and neglected everything else. And they neglected everything else. And what they wanted you to see, and what they saw, and what they wanted you to see is Jordan Ryder guilty of aggravated murder. What we, the defense, will do in today's trial is show you not what the prosecution wants you to see, but the truth. That Jordan Ryder is innocent. Today, the state of Midlands is charging Jordan Ryder with aggravated murder. Because of this, the prosecution must prove that Jordan Ryder knowingly caused the death of Parker Page. Opposing counsel must prove both knowledge and causation beyond a reasonable doubt. This burden rests solely on the prosecution in today's trial. The prosecution will call witnesses today and try to paint you a picture of who Jordan Ryder is. What they want you to see is an ex-convict with anger issues that murdered her own daughter. But we, the defense, will show you the truth. We will show you Jordan, a grieving mother who just lost her daughter after spending years desperately trying to see her again. I want to take us to 2012. Jordan Ryder has just been incarcerated, and she learns that her daughter had been diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta, commonly referred to as brittle bones disease. But Jordan Ryder will testify that it was this diagnosis that motivated her to bettering her life and controlling her anger issues. She took the vocational courses that the prison offered. She met with a social worker, and on June 2nd, 2018, she was released early from prison. Jordan Ryder wanted to put her past behind her and be the mother that her daughter desperately needed. So, on July 14th, 2018, she planned a hiking trip to Calkins campgrounds. During this trip, the two went camping, went on a hike, enjoyed lunch, and enjoyed the company that these two wanted. But when Jordan Ryder came back from taking a shower, her daughter was gone. Frantically, she searched the campsite, Lacrone Loop, even using the tracking software on her daughter's phone, but to no avail. Jordan Ryder will testify that during this night, she knew she couldn't call the police because she was afraid. She was afraid of what the prosecution would think happened. She was afraid that they would take her daughter away from her. She was afraid that she would be put into a dangerous situation again. She was afraid because she knew what they wanted to see. Throughout today's trial, we, the defense, will show how the prosecution saw what they wanted to see and neglected key evidence in today's trial. One way we'll demonstrate this is by calling Cameron Lee to the stand. Cameron Lee will testify that during this hiking trip, he saw a camper at Campsite 7. But we do not know who this camper is, because the police failed to do a thorough investigation of Calkins Campground, and because of which, and they did this because they didn't want to see that. They wanted a suspect. They wanted Jordan Ryder. And finally, you will hear from Dr. Elliot Lopez, former Chief Medical Examiner of Midlands. He will testify that the autopsy done by Dr. Quincy of Parker Page came to rushed conclusions, miscalculations, and neglected the severity of Parker Page's osteogenesis imperfecta. And at the end of today's trial, you will hear from my co-counsel, Matthew Calcara. He will review over the facts of this case, and he will show you how the prosecution chose what they wanted to see. What we, the defense, hope is that you do not fall victim to this tunnel vision. We hope that you see the truth, and we hope that you come with a deliberation that is only supported by the truth. A verdict of not guilty.
Plaintiff, first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Jordan, or Detective Jetty Chesney to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor? Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Detective J. Kenny Chesney.
And what do you do for a detective?
I'm a detective with the Midlands Police Department.
Have you always been a detective?
No, I was a patrol officer for about 8 years, and then I was promoted to detective.
Now, what sort of training have you had in your career?
So I completed a 720-hour basic law enforcement program. It was a basic training where you get pretty much everything you need to do to be a patrol officer. And then when I was promoted in 2016, I received a 40-hour detective course. Taught you all kinds of things from locking down a search site to working with other law enforcement agencies. And then in 2017, I completed a course put on by the International Homicide Investigators Association. And from then on, I was able to investigate homicides and murders.
What does your department typically have you investigate?
Normally, it's all kinds of different felonies. I've done 6 homicides in my time.
Now, let's move on to your investigation today. How did you get involved in this case?
I received a call from one of the patrol sergeants at 7:30 informing me of a missing child.
Where did you go after you got this call?
I went to the house of Corbin Dallas, who was the person who filed the report.
And what did you learn from Mr. Dallas?
Mr. Dallas spoke to me about Parker Page being missing from Jordan Ryder. Apparently they went with Jordan Ryder to go do something, but Corbin Dallas had no idea where they were, so we did a search of the surrounding area and the house.
Did you find anything useful?
We did not find anything useful, however, Corbin Dallas approached me later and informed me about the Find My iPhone app, and after I verbally berated him for withholding information for some time, he pointed me towards the location of where Parker Page was at the previous day.
Did you go to this location?
I did. I informed Midland State Police and the Department of Fish and Wildlife to come and assist me in my search.
But before you went, did you decide to inform any media outlets or?
I did a 9:20 release an Amber Alert, and then at 10:20, after I arrived at the campground, I made a press release.
Is that standard procedure to wait those times?
It is.
Now, Detective, let's talk about what you did when you got to the campground. Who did you talk to?
I spoke with Armando Rodriguez first.
What did you learn from Mr. Rodriguez?
Mr. Rodriguez pointed me towards the location of Jordan Ryder, as well as the campsite that they were.
Did you go there?
I did immediately.
What did you find?
I found Jordan Ryder sleeping in their kitchen.
Did you wake Miss Ryder up?
I did. I asked Miss Ryder where where Parker Page was, and she responded with missing.
And how did Miss Ryder appear to you at this time?
Like I said, Miss Ryder had just woken up from me waking her up, and she just seemed like someone waking up.
Now, did you decide to search Miss Ryder's campsite?
I did. I took in all the surrounding pieces of honestly, I just tried to take in everything I could. It's better to have more evidence than no evidence.
What did you find?
I found everything from a spade, some stakes, and a hiking stick.
Now, you said you found a hiking stick. Would you recognize that if I showed it to you in court today?
I would.
Your Honor, I'm approaching opposing counsel with what the label is Exhibit 17. Approaching on this with what has been labeled as Exhibit 17. Now, what is that?
This is the hiking staff I found in Jordan Ryder's tent.
How do you recognize it?
I found it.
Is it in the same or substantially similar condition as when you found it?
It's exactly the same.
Your Honor, the prosecution offers Exhibit 17 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Accepted.
Now, why was this important in your investigation?
So, like I said, I tried to collect a lot of evidence. It didn't seem to be important until a few days later, where I received a medical report from Dr. Quincy.
What did you learn from this report?
Dr. Quincy said that the reason of death was blunt force trauma, and we were trying to find things.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Response?
Your Honor, this witness does have knowledge of this event, as in his police report it states that he received the report from Dr. Quincy.
May I respond?
You may.
The objection wasn't whether or not they recognized it and it was in the report. The objection is that Detective Chesney stated that this was the murder weapon of Miss Parker Page, and that is lack of personal knowledge.
Response?
Your Honor, I would believe that would be the detective's conclusion, so that would be an alternate issue objection. But also, I don't remember hearing that. I might have misheard though.
I didn't quite hear that, but need a little more foundation. I think that'll satisfy those concerns as well.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, why did you think this was involved in the death of Parker Page?
So like I said, Dr. Quincy said the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. However, this hiking staff was found to be consistent with injuries found on the collarbone.
And what was consistent with the injury on the collarbone?
It was the tip of the hiking staff.
Now, Detective Chesney, did you arrest Miss Ryder that day?
I did. I arrested Miss Ryder on suspect of breaking her parole shortly after I spoke with her.
And what was your priority at this point in the investigation?
Priority was finding Parker Page.
Now let's move on to the rest of the investigation at this point. What did you do after you had Miss Ryder arrested?
Well, so I had I had some of my officers take Miss Ryder down to the police station. Also, all right, after we apprehended the suspect, we decided to go ahead and try to find Parker Page, because at this time there was still a missing child report, so we were trying to find her as soon as possible.
And did you search the rest of the campground and the other campsites?
We did. I had my officers and like I said, the state police and the Fish and Wildlife Department help me canvass the area, and eventually I spoke with Mr. Kelly Deuce.
What did you learn from Mr. Deuce?
Mr. Deuce pointed me to the location they last heard Parker Page and Jordan Ryder arguing.
And did you go to that location?
Immediately, yes.
What did you find at the top of this, or wherever this was?
So it was on the overlook of the LeCron Roof. I had a bunch of my officers with me. We decided to look around the surrounding area. We couldn't find anything. However, police dog Ziva pointed me towards the bottom of the cliff.
Did you go to the bottom of the cliff?
I did. We fought through some foliage and eventually we found Parker Page's body.
Can you tell the court what time that was at?
It was 12:30.
And what did you do after you found Parker Page's body?
Also, I had one of my officers secure the area, secure the body as well, and we decided to proceed on with the investigation.
So what was the next step?
So I decided I wanted to speak with Jordan Ryder herself.
And did you record or have a record of this interview?
I did.
Would you recognize it if I showed you the report today?
I would.
Your Honor, I am approaching the opposing counsel, who has been labeled as Exhibit 1.
Would you like to set up?
Since I think we're also the jury, we'll wait to have it until it's been actually evidence.
Yes, Your Honor. Approaching the witness with the same. Now, could you identify that for the court?
This is the transcript of the conversation, interrogation. that Jordan Ryder had.
How do you recognize it?
It has my name on it, it has the exact time I spoke with Jordan Ryder, and at the end it's signed by Owen Alexander, the notary public.
And do you regularly make documents like this in your work as a police officer and detective?
Most of the time, every time we do an investigation.
And is it a fair and accurate representation?
It's the exact representation.
Your Honor, the prosecution offers to vote on evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, as to more prejudicial than probative.
Explain.
If Detective Chesney starts reading these statements directly from the exhibit, then that is more prejudicial than probative, as it is trying to mislead the jury into what Ms. Jordan Ryder might have done.
Response?
And if I may, the standard is unfairly prejudicial rather than probative. So in this case, it's not unfairly prejudicial for you as the jury to hear these statements that give context to Ms. Ryder's actions, what she did during this investigation with her daughter, as well as the steps Detective Chesney took in his investigation. The jury needs to hear this to understand what happened today.
I'm going to overrule that objection. Do you have any other objections?
No, Your Honor.
Then it's admitted.
Your Honor, may I publish to the jury?
You may.
Approaching with Exhibit 1. Now, can you talk to me about some of the statements that stood out to you in this interview?
Yeah, so the largest thing that I wanted to look at was the talk of a insurance policy that Jordan Ryder was speaking about.
Why did that stick out to you, or why do you want to talk about that?
Because the insurance policy was changed at 3 a.m. The day after Parker Page was missing.
Do you know what time estimate Parker Page died at?
The time estimate is between 4 to 6 p.m. July 14th.
Was this after that?
This was on July 15th at 3 a.m.
Now, is there a record that you got of this insurance change?
I did.
Would you recognize it if I showed you the report?
I would.
Your Honor, I'm approaching opposing counsel.
What has been marked as Exhibit 25? Approaching the witness with the same. Now, could you identify that for the court?
This is the life insurance policy that I received from the insurance company of Jordan Ryder, JFG Insurance Company.
How do you recognize it?
Well, like I said, it's from the JFG Insurance Company, and also it's signed on the back by Matthew Ample and Emily Hommel of the Notary Public.
And is it a fair and accurate representation of the document?
It is. It also has Jordan Ryder's signature on it.
Your Honor, the prosecution offers Exhibit 25 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, as well as is also more prejudicial than probative to be entered. The prosecution is trying to use this as motive for Ms. Jordan Ryder's actions when we have no sort of context as to reasoning why this insurance policy was filled, so it makes it more substantially more prejudicial than probative.
Are we going to hear from Ms. Ryder today?
Yes, we are.
Response.
Your Honor, that would be my response. Ms. Ryder has the opportunity to explain this in her direct examination, as well as the fact that it gives the jury a peek at what she was doing that night.
I agree with Will.
Your Honor, may I publish to the jury?
You may.
Approaching to exhibit 25. Now, why did this stand out to you?
So like I said, the time was changed at 3 a.m., specifically 3:12 a.m. on July 15th, and the insurance policy was created at 10:42 on July 14th, the same day the Parker Page was missing.
Now, do you still have exhibit 1 with you?
I do.
Is there anything else that stood out to you in this interview with Ms. Ryder?
She mentioned how she didn't speak with Corbin Dallas before taking Parker Page, who was their legal guardian.
Is that normal in your experience as a police officer and detective?
No, that's usually conduct, same as with kidnapping.
Now, did you find any other evidence on Ms. Ryder person that you talked about in this interview?
I did. So I found, at the time of the arrest, I found a napkin on the body, or on the person of Jordan Ryder.
Would you recognize this napkin if I showed it to you in court today?
I would.
Your Honor, I'm approaching opposing counsel with what is marked as exhibit 26. Approaching the witness with the same. Did you identify that document for the court?
This is the napkin, or a picture of the napkin I found on Jordan Ryder's person at the time of the arrest.
Is that Ms. Ryder's handwriting?
It is.
And is it a fair and accurate representation?
It is.
Your Honor, the prosecution offers exhibit 26 of the evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Your Honor, may I publish to the jury?
You may.
Now, can you walk us through your thought process with this napkin and what it revealed to you?
Of course. So under 911, it says, "I'm so sorry this happened. It was all my fault. I was just so angry. I didn't mean to do it." Now these are all crossed off, which means possible explanations that were.
Objection, Your Honor, it's a speculation.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna sustain that objection.
Thank you. And at this time, we'd like to strike offending testimony, please.
Offending testimony, strike.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you just point to the statements that stood out to you?
Of course. So "I'm so sorry this happened. It was all my fault. I was just so angry. I didn't mean to do it." They're all X'd off, and finally, in quotation marks, "missing" is circled.
And are there any numerical amounts on this document?
There are. It says 10,000 now, followed by 50,000 question mark, 100,000 question mark, 75,000 question mark, and then finally 200,000
Objection, Your
circled.
Honor, it's the cumulative.
I'm gonna agree, just get to the point a little faster, because we do have it in front of us.
Yes, Your Honor.
And again, we'd like to strike offending testimony.
I don't think there was really anything offending there, so I'm gonna decline on that one this time.
Yes, Your Honor.
Detective Chesney, did you look at Ms. Ryder in the police system?
I did.
Did you find anything that stuck out to you?
I did. There were a couple of arrests.
For what?
Domestic violence and drug distribution.
Now, one last question, Detective. Based on all the evidence you gathered in your investigation, what was your conclusion?
Well, with the same amounts of found on the napkin, the insurance policy, and Jordan Ryder, decided to arrest Jordan Ryder.
Your Honor, may I retrieve the exhibits and pass the witness this time?
You may. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court?
Does?
Detective Chesney, your investigation began by going to 1519 Groveland Way, correct?
Good morning. Yes,
And there you spoke to Corbin Dallas.
I did.
Dallas informed you that they had not seen Jordan Ryder since July 13th.
Yes, sir.
They also informed you that pertaining to Parker Page, they didn't know any of the friends of Miss Page.
Your Honor, not really an objection. I asked the opposing counsel to move a little to the right so I can see my witness.
I'll ask the question then. Corbin Dallas stated they didn't know the friends of Miss Parker Page.
Yes, sir.
They also stated they did not know the locations that Miss Parker Page liked to go.
Objection, Your Honor, as to hearsay on the statements of Corbin Dallas.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. Pursuant to Rule 801C2, these statements are being used not for the truth of the matter, but rather the subsequent action or lack thereof of Detective Chesney.
Response?
Your Honor, I believe these statements are being used for the truth of the matter and the fact that Corbin Dallas's statements are being put on the record to show not what Detective Chesney did, but more about Corbin Dallas himself.
I agree, I'm going to sustain. I think you can get there without eliciting statements, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. So, you gathered a lot of information from Corbin Dallas.
I did.
And after gathering all this information, was Corbin Dallas brought in for an interrogation?
No,
Were they considered a suspect?
no,
Was anybody else other than Jordan Ryder considered a suspect?
no, sir.
Moving on to your investigation, you went to Calkins Campgrounds,
Yes, sir.
and you spoke to the owner of the establishment, Armani Rodriguez.
I did.
You showed Rodriguez a photo of Parker Page,
Yes, sir.
and you asked Rodriguez if they had recognized Jordan Ryder.
Yes, sir.
But did you ask Armani Rodriguez who else was at the campsite that day?
No, sir.
Did you ask who else had purchased campsites that night?
No, sir.
So, if someone was at campsite 7, you wouldn't know who that was, would you?
No, sir.
Moving on, you were informed of the Crone Loop by Kelly Dews, correct?
Yes, sir.
Dews stated that they had heard arguing between a younger child and an older adult on this trail.
Your Honor, I state hearsay on the statements of Kelly Dews.
Response?
Similar again to 801c2, these statements are being used for the subsequent action of how Detective Chesney responded to hearing this information, not necessarily the truth of the matter.
I don't think we heard an actual statement, so I'm going to overrule. If he does get you an actual statement, feel free to reobject again.
So I'll ask the question again. Dews told you that she had heard screaming between a younger child and an older adult.
Yes, sir. Jordan. Yeah.
Your Honor, I state hearsay.
I agree this time it is sustained. They took without listing statement.
Alright. Okay. But you already testified on direct examination that Dews told you these statements, correct?
Yes, sir.
But do you actually have evidence that can place Jordan Ryder at the time of that scream?
Just Kelly Dews.
Yes, Kelly Dews told you during direct examination that she heard it before, that she saw them beforehand, correct?
Yes, sir.
But not at the time of the incident.
The scream, Kelly Dews was not able to see the people who were screaming.
Thank you. Later on, you eventually arrested Jordan Ryder.
That's correct.
Now, did you do a search of Jordan Ryder's residence, or address?
There was no address, it was just the address of Corbin Dallas.
Well, you are aware that 810 Dupree Avenue is the address of Jordan Ryder, correct?
Something like that, yes, sir.
And there was not a search done of 810 Dupree Avenue.
No, sir. Jordan Ryder's at the campsite.
But this is the address of your only suspect, correct?
That's correct.
Moving on. I want to talk about what happened later in your investigation. On July 22nd, you received a call from Remy Mouchard.
That's correct.
Mouchard told you that they had information pertaining to the case.
That's correct. And then I questioned Remy as to, it was the case from a week ago.
And when you arrived at the restaurant, they had the phone of Miss Parker Page, correct?
That's correct.
Now, in your investigation, you used a tracking software, correct?
That's correct.
And this tracking software led you to Calkins Campground,
That's correct.
because that was the location of Parker Page's phone.
That's correct. Parker Page's phone ran out of power at the Calkins Campground.
And it placed that phone on July 14th.
That's correct.
But now, on July 22nd, the phone is at Mr. Mouchard's restaurant.
That's correct. It's probably true that Jordan Ryder took it to the location.
Did you do a search of Mr. Mouchard's restaurant?
No.
Furthermore, Mr. Mouchard told you that they had receipts, correct?
That's correct.
These receipts pertain to the times Miss Ryder was at the restaurant.
That's correct.
Did you take these receipts?
No, the information was unnecessary. It's because I had the time of the time of the change of the insurance policy at 3:12 a.m.
But you do not know that. But that insurance policy doesn't tell you where Jordan Ryder was at that time, correct?
That's correct.
So you didn't take these receipts that could.
That's also correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Your Honor, they asked how much time is remaining in direct examination.
15 minutes.
Can you read that?
Briefly, Your Honor. Now, Detective Chesney, what was the priority in your investigation before you found Parker Page's body?
It was finding Parker Page.
When did you talk to Armando Rodriguez?
Shortly after I arrived at the Calkins Campground.
When did you talk to Kelly Dews?
Shortly after I arrived at the Calkins Campground, around 10:20.
When did you talk to Ms. Ryder?
about 10 o'clock.
Why did you arrest Ms. Ryder?
Because Miss Ryder was, like I said, in breaking her parole, so she was suspect anyway.
What were the biggest pieces of evidence that led you to believe Ms. Ryder is the suspect in this case?
Like I said, it was Jordan Ryder breaking her parole as to the boundaries that she could travel, as well as the missing location of Parker Page and finding Jordan Ryder in the campsite alone after going with Parker Page.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Detective Chesney, you stated just on your redirect that when you first got to the campsite, you were mostly concerned about finding Ms. Parker,
That's correct.
Ms. Page. But once the body was found, did you figure out who was at that campsite?
No,
Did you figure out who purchased campsites after the body was found?
no, it was not necessary.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I ask my witness be excused.
He's excused. Prosecution, next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call Mr. Kelly Deuce to the stand. Can you please state your name for the record?
My name is Kelly Juice.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Deuce?
I am the owner, prior runner of this MeTube channel and various other small ventures that I run in, like, for example, my writing. I do articles for adventure magazines and such.
And how many followers do you have?
My MeTube channel has about 4,000 followers, a little less.
And what's your content like?
It's mostly adventure based. I like to get outdoors, do things, show people a little bit of the world from their homes. I've been to Antarctica before. I do a lot of jumps. I try to mix the extreme and the relaxed.
And what was the last trip you went on?
The last trip I went on was to Midlands.
And what did you do at Midlands?
I saw various hiking trails around the state.
Where did you go at Midlands?
I went to about 5 different hiking trails and ended up at the Calkin campgrounds before I left.
And what is the trail that you went on in Calkin?
There were 2. I went on the Wagner Loop and then the Lecron Loop.
Can you describe the Lacron Loop?
The Lecron Loop is hazardous, to put it in a word. There's steep drops, a lot of opportunities to roll your ankle. The thick brush is itself a little disturbing, especially if you get off the trail. It's long as well. It's a couple miles.
When you went on the trail, did you see anyone?
I saw 2 people, Jordan and Parker.
And what did they look like?
Jordan was a middle-aged woman, and Parker was a preteen.
What were they doing?
As I walked up, Parker was slashing at the brush with a hiking staff, and then Jordan was yelling at her to quit it.
And what was their interaction with each other? What was their tone?
With each other, it was just short of hostile. There was a lot of raised voices, a little angrier than I like to be. So I didn't stay too long to begin with, just because I didn't really want to hang around this. Then at some point, Jordan went so far as to snatch this hiking staff from Parker after Parker continued to stab her in the leg with it. That's not something I feel like I wanted to see, so I left.
And where did you go after that?
I didn't want to pass through, it seemed a bit rude, so I went off the trail and tried to find my way around that way. That was useless. It took me about an hour to get back to the trail, where I saw them again.
And what were they doing this time?
Their voices were a little louder, and I just seen them arguing with each other, just yelling back and forth.
Did you see anything?
As I was walking away, as I did decide to eventually pass through to make it to the overlook. I looked back and I saw Jordan grab either the hiking staff or Parker's arm, but I couldn't quite tell which was.
And on your way up to the overlook, did anything unusual happen?
About 15 minutes from then, I heard yelling from behind me, and then a few seconds later, I heard a yelp sound. I'm not certain the exact spot, but it was definitely human, whoever did the yelp.
Could you recognize who did the yelp or the scream?
The scream, yes, that was definitely Parker Page's voice. The yelp, I'm not certain, no.
And at what time was this?
About 4:40, I was checking my phone pretty regularly, looking for service, trying to make updates. It was about 4:40 when I heard the yelp.
Did you ever go back to camp?
I did, it took a while to get back down. Again, the trail's a bit hazardous and going down is always a little more of a threat to my ankle than going up. So by the time I made it back to camp, it was about 6:30.
And did you see anyone on your way down?
No.
Let's talk about the next day, what happened?
The next day, I woke up, I made a little jot of things to do for the day, things I thought I might need, just because, to jog my memory, so I'm not calling my mom, it was her birthday. And then I went outside because I heard sirens, there was like a bunch of people, officers. I was approached by Detective Chesney, and then somebody mentioned that Parker was missing. I told Detective Chesney that I had seen them on the trail before. I heard a yelp, and then we went to go look for them.
And did they find anything?
They did. After a few hours of searching, I had taken us back to where the yelp was, and then we kind of fanned out from there. It still took a few hours though.
And
they eventually found her. I did not.
right, where did they find her?
They found her at underneath the overlook off the edge.
At what trail?
On the left front loop.
And where did you see Parker last?
The last place I had seen Parker was just at the base of at the bottom of the trail leading to the overlook.
And who was she with?
She was with Jordan.
No further questions.
Cross-examination?
May I proceed? So you're a social influencer, correct?
I do. I don't like to term it that way. I think of myself as like an adventurous who kind of publishes their thing, but yes.
And you've been known to exaggerate things to generate revenue, correct?
I exaggerate my follower base, the numbers. I'm looking for advertisers or pitching myself to different sponsors. It's good to have a bigger number, yes.
So yes, you have been known to exaggerate things.
Yes.
Alrighty, and it was a pretty hot day that day on the 14th, correct?
It was terribly hot, yes.
And you said that Lacrone Loop had a lot of dangerous drop-offs?
There were multiple throughout. There are even cliff places where you have to climb on the trail using iron rungs.
And you saw Ms. Ryder and her daughter on the Lacrone Loop, correct?
I did.
Very briefly though, right?
Yeah, it wasn't too long. I didn't stay around to chat.
Yeah, and at first you thought Ms. Ryder's name was Morgan, not Jordan, correct?
That's true.
You didn't hear it very well?
It was on the backpack that Parker was wearing, so that's why I kind of assumed.
And you claim that you could definitely recognize Parker Page's voice when you couldn't see her?
Yes, I had heard them yelling for a few minutes prior to this.
And you showed Detective Chesney where you had seen them, correct?
I took him to where I heard the yelp, not to where I had seen them.
Alright. And you were, you helped with the search, correct?
I was part of the search party, yes.
And then once Parker Page was found, you heard one of the police officers tell another one that Jordan Ryder never should
Your
have...
Honor, hearsay.
Response?
We're not using this for the truth of the matter, rather we're using this for the subsequent action of the Midland State Police Department and their bias against Ms. Ryder.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
The witness is not a part of the police department, so they would have no knowledge or reason as to why they were saying these out-of-court statements.
With the subsequent action answer, I'm going to sustain the objection. I think you can get to it without listing the statements.
Alrighty. So you heard police officers talking You heard them generally talking about Jordan Ryder, correct?
They were talking about Jordan. Yeah, I heard
Right, about how he likely killed his daughter?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Sustained.
But you did hear them discussing Ms. Ryder, correct?
They were talking about Jordan, yeah.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor, briefly, for the objection, motion sustained, may I move to strike that statement? Thank you. You're a social media influencer, Mr. Deuce,
I have some influence, yes.
and you exaggerate for revenue.
Yes, bringing in sponsors isn't easy, and I like a nice round number, and I try to get as many as I can. But it's not like my numbers are published; they're on the website.
But would you exaggerate in court today, in a case like this?
No, the difference between my social media presence and the persona that I put on for my crowd essentially is very different than something like a formal setting as this. There's no reason to. I would not.
Thank you, Mr. Deuce. No further questions, Your Honor.
Recross.
No, Your Honor.
This witness is excused. Prosecution, next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. This time the prosecution calls Dr. Quincy to the stand. Your Honor, may I have a moment to construct a demonstrative aid?
You may.
First,
You may.
good morning, Doctor. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Good morning. My name is Dr. Robert Quincy.
What is your job?
I'm the chief medical examiner for the state of Midlands. I perform the autopsy.
What's your education in this field?
So I went to Ohio State for my undergrad, and then I went to Virginia Med. And since then, I've been working mainly in pediatrics before moving on to medical examinations.
What professional experience do you have?
So as a medical examiner, I've performed several autopsies, and I've particularly studied osteogenesis, that being bones, and I focused a lot on pediatrics early in my career.
Have you had any published articles in this field?
Yes, I have 3.
And are you licensed and certified as well?
Yes.
Your Honor, our approaching opposing counsel was previously marked as Exhibit 20. The court's opposed to the same. What does it understand to you?
This is my resume.
How do you recognize it?
It is mine.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the prosecution moves to enter Exhibit 20 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Published to a jury.
It may.
Now, Doctor, what materials did you review in today's case?
I reviewed the body, obviously, as well as the medical history of the body.
Now, what methods did you use in reviewing these materials?
All the standard methods that I've always used.
And are these standard in your field?
Yes, they are.
And did you reliably apply them?
I did.
And were these materials sufficient to reach a conclusion?
Yes, they were.
Now, Doctor, I do want to go through what you talked about. What did you first notice about Parker's body?
The first thing I noticed is that, it was very cold compared to a lot of the bodies I received. So that normally indicates that it had been sitting somewhere for some time.
Objection, Your Honor, as to improper expert opinion.
Explain.
This witness has not laid sufficient foundation pursuant to 702 to testify to his opinions as an expert.
Any of the prongs in particular?
Particularly 702C.
Response?
Your Honor, I specifically asked the witness if they used the methods that they had and reliably applied them, that these methods and principles were specifically to answer the 702C rule.
May I respond to those guys, Your Honor?
You may.
This witness testified, quote, he used all these standard methods. We do not know the name of this method, whether or not it has a known error rate. We don't know what exactly this method is. Pursuant to case law Richards v. Mississippi Barbecue, we need to have some some indicators of the reliability of this method, to review the method on a case-by-case basis, and we have heard none of this from this witness.
Do you know which page that case law is on?
It was on the third to last, second to last? Second to last. I'm sorry, Your Honor. Not Richards v. Mississippi Barbecue, rather Tarot Readers Association of Midlands v. Merrill Dow.
Response, counsel?
A brief moment, Your Honor. Sorry, which page was it?
It's on page 5 of case law.
Your Honor, if I may, the next lesson is that there is no definitive checklist for applying the reliability of this case law as to the 702C prong. Now, establishing that there are these methods, these are some factors that the jury and Your Honor may weigh in relying on the expert opinion testimony. However, it's not a definitive checklist as stated per the case law. Therefore, the witness can testify more as what methods used, but not necessarily that these are guaranteed things. For example, a known error rate would be a much more mathematical principle and a more subjective body analysis as conducted by the doctor in this autopsy.
So counsel, I agree with you that we don't have to hear everything that's in Tarot Readers, but I don't think we even heard the name of the method or anything that's listed in here, so let's have just a little bit more foundation.
I can lay that foundation, Your Honor.
A motion to strike any testimony so far?
Any offending testimony is stricken, I don't think there is much.
Yes, Your Honor.
Doctor, can you discuss exactly what methods you use and what they're called and go into more detail as to the methods that you use?
Yes, so the methods that I use are the same ones I learned in med school. Particularly, one of the methods was the time of death equation, and that's something that we learned very early in med school. And it's been the same equation that I've always used. I don't remember the exact name for it since I was in school for quite some time, but the equation hasn't changed since.
And what about the methods used on examining the body?
Just standard procedure for how we perform an autopsy. In fact, we do have a code that we use within the department.
Now, moving on to the report that you did, what did you first notice about Parker's body?
The first thing I noticed was that the body was very cold. It appears that it had been laying so
Objection, Your Honor. Again to 702, may I be heard?
You may.
While we have heard a little more foundation, he had mentioned the time of death equation. However, if opposing counsel can have the witness say what the equation is for the court, that would be much appreciated to lay the necessary foundation for what the method is. And further, he had mentioned the standard autopsy. While we do have a name of a method, we don't know what a standard autopsy consists of. We don't know what process there is to take. I just simply ask for more foundation from this witness to testify as an expert.
I think he has laid enough foundation to testify, however, those are fantastic points for you to go to on cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Doctor, going through, can you just walk us through the beginning of your report?
Yes, so I received the body. As per usual, I take note of all the external injuries that I'm able to see, and I annotate all of those, and then I begin an internal examination as well.
Did you make a diagram of this external examination that you conducted?
I did, yes. The part of the autopsy would mark everything.
And would making use of the demonstrative would give you more ability to demonstrate this to the jury?
Yes, definitely.
Your Honor, permission for the witness to step down and make use of the demonstrative?
You may.
You can move, Counselor, if you need
Yeah.
to see better. Do you need to turn it at all, or is it good?
No, I believe we are good right now.
Can you explain what this is?
Yes, so this is a sheet on the autopsy that we mark all the external injuries on.
And are those the numbers annotated?
Yes, correct. The numbers annotate the different injuries. That way we can reference them later.
Okay. Now, going through these external injuries, were any not relevant that you labeled to Parker's death?
Yes, there were a few, mainly.
Objection, Your Honor. This witness is using a chart to summarize otherwise inadmissible hearsay, which is prohibited under Richards v. Mississippi Barbecue.
Response, counsel?
One moment, Your Honor, to look at the case law. Actually, Your Honor, this report is, the expert is not eliciting any statements that would be hearsay. The expert witness is using the report that he prepared for today's trial. He's not listing any statements therefrom. He's using the conclusions that he found in conducting that report. This diagram is merely helping him explain those findings and examinations to the jury. Furthermore, this diagram was brought up in Captain's meeting and had no objections to from the opposing counsel.
May I respond to those guns? While this diagram is summarizing his report, the report in itself is hearsay for this matter. So this chart is summarizing otherwise inadmissible hearsay. Further, in Captain's meeting, that is simply if there's any objections to what it would show, not any objections to the admissibility of the demonstrative.
Your Honor, may I be heard on those grounds?
You may.
Applying the case law of the Richard versus Mississippi Barbecue, it's inadmissible hearsay without first relating that hearsay to some specialized knowledge on the expert's part. It's exactly what the expert's doing. We've gone over that this is Parker's body, that he used this diagram in conducting the autopsy, and this chart is exactly representative of that of that report that he prepared. It is therefore not, it has been related to that hearsay and is therefore allowed to be used at that point. And furthermore, I would also then argue this under Rule 803-4 is a statement made for medical diagnosis or treatment, therefore would be an objection to hearsay if it was even found to be so.
With that explanation, I'll overrule it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you repeat the question, Doctor?
Please.
So were there any injuries that were irrelevant to Dr. Smith?
Yes, so in particular, there was a fracture as annotated by number 8 on the diagram at the ankle. I did notice that this fracture had had time to heal, so the bone had begun to heal itself, so that had occurred a long time ago.
Witness gestured to number 8 on the diagram. Now, were there any other injuries that were more relevant or suffered more recently on Parker's body?
Yes, of note, there was a fracture at number 9 on the skull and a fracture at number 5 on the victim's left clavicle.
Can you go over number 9 that you just gestured to?
Yes, so I determined number 9, blunt force trauma to the head, a fracture at number 9 to be the cause of death.
Do you know what was this cause, or what was likely caused her to have this?
It could have been anything from a blow to the head or a fall.
And you mentioned number 5 on the diagram. Can you explain that as well?
That's correct. So the fracture at number 5 was particularly troubling. I did notice the length after measuring the bleeding and the fracture to be very exact in 2.25 centimeters, which is not something that I typically see through autopsies.
Permission for the witness to return to stand. Now, Doctor, can you explain Parker's medical condition and why that's a factor in the cause of death?
Yes, so in reviewing her medical files all the way back to birth, I noticed that she was diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta, which is also known as brittle bone disease. And she had type 1 OI, as we call it, and that shows that she would fracture more easily than a normal person.
Okay. And then you mentioned the 2.25 centimeter bruise on her left clavicle. Can you explain why that was relevant, or if you included any addenda to your report?
Objection, Your Honor, as to compound question.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you explain why the left clavicle bruise was interesting to you?
Yes, I received a hiking staff from the detective that was in charge of the case, and after measuring that hiking staff that had been found at the campsite, I believe, it was exactly the same size as the fracture that I found on the left clavicle.
Your Honor, approaching the witness was already been entered evidence as Exhibit 17. Now, Doctor, can you explain why the hiking staff was relevant?
Yes, so the tip that I measured, this exact straight line in semicircle, matches exactly with the fracture that I found on the left clavicle. And again, seeing things so exact in an autopsy is something very troubling, as often that's not something that we normally see.
Finally, her time of death. Can you explain the methods that you used and what conclusions you reached?
Yes, so again,
Objection, Your Honor, once again to compound question. I'd ask that opposing counsel break up what he was asking.
That's, you can break it up.
Your Honor, is an objection to cross.
Yeah, it is an objection for cross, so.
May I proceed? Can you explain her time of death?
yes, so I used the standard formula that we use to calculate the time of death, and from that I determined it was between 4 and 6 p.m.
And Why were you able to reach this conclusion?
So just taking the core body of the temperature into account, we're able to use that equation to come up with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to the time of death.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions, Your Honor. Permission to retrieve and deconstruct the demonstrator.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Once I find this right here. May I inquire as to how much time I have?
You have 19 minutes.
May I proceed?
You may.
You are currently the chief medical examiner here in Midlands.
Good morning. Yes, I am.
Good morning. And you were hired by Dr. Lopez,
That's correct.
and he's here testifying for the defense.
As far as I'm aware,
He hired you initially in 2006, correct?
I believe so.
And then hired you again in 2014?
Objection, Your Honor, is the relevance of this testimony.
Here's my turn. I'm laying the foundation for the relationship between the two expert witnesses in today's case who are going to be disputing each other's facts. That in itself is very relevant to today's case.
I think it's a little early for relevance, but if you think they've strayed too far off the path, bring it.
Yes, Your Honor.
So you have worked under Dr. Lopez for several years.
That's correct.
Now I'd like to move on to the autopsy that you performed.
Yes.
You didn't write the report until the day after you conducted the autopsy.
That is correct.
And the body arrived in autopsy at 4:05 p.m.?
Yes, it did.
You didn't begin the autopsy until an hour later at 5:05 p.m.?
That's correct.
And you didn't take the temperature of the body until 5:35 p.m.?
Also correct.
And during this time, the body had been in several temperatures, correct?
I suppose from wherever the body was retrieved to my coroner's office.
Yeah, so it started at Calkins Campground,
I believe so, yes.
where it was a hot day.
From what I've been told.
Then it was transported 30 minutes to your office,
Yes.
and then sat in your office until you took the temperature.
Yes.
And you said that you determined the time of death by using the standard equation.
That's correct.
Can you say the equation for us?
If you'd like me to. It is 98.6 degrees minus the core temperature of the body, which is deep inside of the body, divided by 1.5, and that gives us the time of death.
And you found the core body temperature by a liver probe, correct?
That's correct.
But in looking at the temperature of the body, you didn't factor in these environmental factors, correct?
That's what the formula is for. That factors in all of the different factors that could go into that.
So the formula factors in the temperature of the environment, correct?
The formula captures in all sorts of things that might relate to the changing temperatures. Like, again, this is an autopsy. If we could receive the body the moment it died, that'd be perfect. We have to take what we're given and work with that.
But you had mentioned the equation only having 3 variables, correct?
That's correct.
The standard body temperature, 98.6 degrees.
Yes.
The liver temperature,
That is the one variable, actually, excuse me. There's 2 constants in the variable.
2 constants and a variable.
Yes.
And the one variable is the internal temperature of the liver.
Correct.
And there's also the 1.5 degrees per hour, correct?
Correct.
And when looking at the exterior of Ms. Page,
Yes.
you would notice that she was short-statured.
Yes, as a child normally is.
She was shorter than average for her age.
Yes.
She was also lighter than average.
Yes. Again, she had osteogenesis imperfecta, bone disease.
And you noticed that she had large amounts of bruising.
Correct.
And people with osteogenesis imperfecta tend to bruise easily.
That's correct. They have easy bruising or easily fractured.
And you pointed out one bruise in particular,
Yes.
the one on her left clavicle.
Yes.
But you can't tell us when that bruise occurred.
Not with a terrible degree of scientific certainty. I can tell due to some of the discoloration a general idea of whether it was before or after death.
So you're saying, so the bruise did occur before death?
It appeared that it occurred around the time of death, yes.
But you can't tell how long before death.
Correct?
It could have been hours before the time of death.
There's a lot of it could be's in my field, so I took what I had and produced my